So, who remembers The Matrix? Do you remember the end of The Matrix where it gets so crazy and dramatic? And basically, Neo is about to be like pulverized with a bunch of guns from all three agents. And he stands up, he realizes he's the one, he's like confident and knows exactly who he is. And instead of trying to dodge the bullets or trying to attack anyone or do anything crazy, he literally just says no. He literally just like authoritatively is like, I'm not even playing this game with you anymore. And the bullets just stop midair and then fall to the ground. Such a great scene. And if you're about to tell me that you have not seen The Matrix, let me help you out. You need to go see it. It's like literally a worthwhile movie. But anyway, been thinking about that because I love just the confidence that he has when he actually realizes who he is, the authority and the just strength that he walks out with is I really think what God wants Christians to live like. And far too often we're sitting around like, oh, I don't know, life is hard and let's go like wait for heaven and blah, blah, blah. But I think God wanted us to walk with that kind of authority, that kind of confidence, that kind of strength in our life, and wanted to be able to bless us with the resources and with the miracles and with things that we can't even imagine because that's God's best for us here on earth. So, we're going to be talking about finances and talking about it from the perspective of authority. Like, what does God actually intend for our finances? He doesn't intend for us to be broke, but also he doesn't necessarily need for us to be billionaires, right? It's kind of somewhere in between the two that God really calls us to live and to walk. And so we're going to go back to the very beginning of the Bible to kind of start talking about this and where this authority comes from. Because I really think if you understand how this authority was given to you, it's a lot easier to walk it out. So, from the very get go, Genesis 1 starts with the creator uses commands to make literally everything. We've got light, we've got heavens, we've got time, we've got creatures. Like all of these different things are suddenly created. Verse 16 and 17 tells us that he puts the sun and the moon in the sky and that they are going to govern. They're literally placed there with the phrase govern. And so that means memshala in Hebrew. It literally means rule, dominion, power, or realm. So essentially, we know now scientifically the mood controls the tide. It literally directs how waters move, which the sun controls the temperature, the weather, the seasons. Obviously, we see how these two straits, these two beings have power over our lives and have authority over the way that things go down. So both good and bad are controlled by and influenced by what God has set up in the sky. So the part that I love is Genesis 1 26 through 29. It says, we were made in God's image to rule over the fish, the birds, the livestock, and the animals. And then God says, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. So, if you think about other cultures, like the way that ancient cultures went, most of the time people were created in other cultures to serve the god. Like basically, they would get the god food and do things for the god and kind of like help him out if they could. But that is not what happens in the Christian story. In the Christian story, we are not meant to be slaves because the God can't handle it. God is in control. God doesn't even need us. He literally puts us on earth so that we can take care of the world. He literally he literally makes us to be in his image, to be just like him, and to basically be his caretakers over the world. So, the Hebrew word that's used in that passage is called tselem. It's translated to image. It means like reflection of something greater. So basically, that word is used to describe an idol, right? Like a little idol that they would have made to say, this is the idol we are serving and giving our reverence to, right? We don't really do that nowadays very much. But the idols that they used to serve had a little bit of power. It had a little bit of it had a little bit of like standing on the earth. Therefore, people were trying to give respect to it, give food to it, give sacrifices to it. And in return, they would get blessings back, right? The image of the God was essentially the God, it was the representation of the God on earth. So if we think about it like that, that's the way that the culture that was writing about this understood it. And that what that literally means is that we are the representation of God. Obviously, we're smaller. Obviously, we don't have quite as much power, quite as much impact, but we're literally meant to represent Him on earth. We literally are created in His image. And that doesn't just mean that God put us here to look nice, it means that from the very beginning, He didn't like want us to just chill or like watch over stuff if we ran out of things to do. He literally put us in charge. We were created, anointed, and blessed from the very beginning to be His right hand man here on earth, to be His representation, His ambassador, His child, right? And then we were going to take the things that He showed us and use those to bless the rest of the world. So realizing this tells us that one, only man is made in God's image, right? The rest of the animals, the trees, none of them have the abilities we have. Angels, not even, just humans. Two, only man is given this type of dominion. And three, man is a final creation made by God, which means He saved the best for last. But anyway, what does that mean for you? I think what it means for all of us is that God starts out the story. He literally starts out the Bible with talking about what He intended for us. He intended to walk with us and help us take care of this world. And that doesn't just mean that we were going to, watch over the trees and the animals. That meant that He put us in charge of renovating and creating things and making things better and getting rid of weeds, right? Like there were some things where we would create and there were some things where we would destroy, right? Like we would take care of and manage the world that He put us in charge of. And from the very beginning, what we see is that God blesses us. It's not like a command to some meaningless slaves. He's not like talking to someone He doesn't care about. He's literally building a relationship with people that He trusts. And then two, God commanded them to spread out and fill the earth. And we always say this is like, go make babies, right? And like, yes, fine, go make babies. But I think He also meant to spread out and fill all of creation, all of the world. He cared about the earth that He put us on. So that meant we were to learn and go, to emulate and grow. We were to become caretakers for the world He made. And if you think about the world He made, if you leave it by itself, things fall apart, right? Like you leave the tree for long enough and it just falls down. Like you leave this and you don't water it, then it doesn't do well, right? Like there are things that we actually have to step in and care for. And that was what God was calling us to. And the ideal plan would include exploration, cultivation, and expansion. We wouldn't just sit in one spot and stare at each other. And that wasn't the point of life on earth. The point was that we would work and we would dream and we would create and we would go. So, redemption is key to grasp. God really had a great plan in mind. And what we see next is so frustrating. God gives them one command, they mess it up, right? Like, not surprisingly, we're not that great. But what's great to see here is that everything that God commanded is not thrown out, right? Like, we move forward doing part of what God had said, but really not everything. And God says that basically the ground is cursed because of us, and that work is cursed, that it's going to be hard. We're going to have more pain. We're going to have more frustration than we should have to begin with. But He never says that the original plan is thrown out. He never says that work is now evil. He never says that we are now pointless. It's got some thorns and it's got some problems, but that doesn't make it inherently bad, which means that God had in mind for us from the get-go to, again, walk with Him and take care of this world. And in return, we would get the blessings, we would get the provision, and we would get the relationship with God to be able to do so. And what we see is God continues the same mandate as we go through the story of Israel. Um, Israel obviously gets promised that they're going to have this promised land. And then things kind of seem to go the exact opposite direction. Like what happens is the Israelites end up getting becoming slaves and being put in Egypt, and they're just stuck there for like 400 years. There's millions of them, but they're just slaves. They have no ability, they have no power, they have none of the things that God has promised them. But I love the story of the Israelites coming out of Egypt and getting to go into the promised land. And that's what we're going to be concentrating more on. How did God intend for them to do this? And for them to do it with authority, right? Like, again, He didn't take away that authority He gave us back in creation. So we get to see how God steps back in, how He steps back into relationship, how He really calls them to go and expand and take care of the world, of Israel as their world, and then the rest of the world. And then we get to talk about what it looks like for God to bless them. I mean, He literally ends up handing them this land over. Here's the wells you didn't build. Here's the cities that you didn't even conceive of. Here's the things that you get to now enjoy and embrace and live in. And how do we kind of translate that to our lives? Like, what do we have to do here in the 2024 to kind of be able to walk out with that kind of authority and that kind of blessing and that kind of provision? I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I'm just tired, right? Like, as much as I love my job, like, gosh, sometimes putting in another day and putting in another year and putting in the rest of my life, right? Like, sometimes it feels like it doesn't have quite the strength and the impact and the amazingness that it should. And again, going back to that scene at the very beginning with the Matrix, like, no, we are not living like that anymore. Like, no, we are done with acting like God doesn't care about our lives, doesn't care about our jobs, doesn't care about our finances. Like, God is in the midst of all of it. And God has better in mind for you than you have far too often settled for. So if you haven't already subscribed here, definitely subscribe. I will keep talking and we'll keep going through this whole story. And just a little reminder, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Stand a little taller. Doesn't mean I'm lonely when I'm alone. What doesn't kill you makes a fighter. Footsteps even lighter. Doesn't mean I'm over 'cause you're gone. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, stronger. So I hope you have a great week and think about how you can walk out stronger and walk out with authority in your life. Have a good one.